Who do you think you are? I know you're kind, always trying to act like you belong somewhere you don't, parading around like money or influence gives you a seat at the table. You're out of place here, and everyone can see it, the manager spat, voice sharp, dripping with contempt. He straightened his tie, chest puffed as if the lobby itself existed to showcase his superiority. His eyes locked on her calm, deliberate steps, and a cruel smirk twisted his lips. Typical. Casual. Unassuming. Thinks she belongs here. Thinks anyone like her belongs here. He stepped closer. I said, stop. The guests in the lobby began to notice, a few shifting uncomfortably, but most were frozen, sensing the tension before they understood it. Excuse me, she asked softly, deliberately calm. You don't belong here, he snapped. I run this hotel, and I decide who is welcome. And you don't belong. He raised his hand before she could respond, and the slap landed, sharp and public, echoing across the marble floors. Time seemed to stop. Guests froze mid-step, hands flew to phones, cameras appeared. Gasps filled the room. She touched her cheek, feeling the sting, but she didn't flinch. She didn't shout. She simply stared at him, letting the silence stretch long enough for him to realize he had overstepped. For a heartbeat, he believed he had one. She'll back down. She'll apologize. She'll know her place. But he was wrong. You hit me, she said finally, voice calm, measured, cold enough to make the room tremble. His smirk faltered. And what if I did? Who are you to stop me? Her eyes sharpened. I own this hotel, she said, letting each word land deliberately. The manager staggered back slightly, panic flashing across his face. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His eyes darted toward his staff, those who had allowed him to belittle guests, to show favoritism, but they stood frozen, guilty, unable to speak. The moment of the slap was the culmination of months of arrogance and prejudice, but it hadn't come out of nowhere. Earlier that day, she had arrived quietly, blending into the lobby as any guest might. She walked slowly, observing. The Langford Hotel gleamed with perfection, polished marble floors, chandeliers casting golden light, the scent of jasmine carefully curated to project calm. But beneath that veneer, she already sensed the tension, the way some guests were prioritized, the way some staff treated certain visitors. The manager was in the center of it all, performing for a select audience. A white couple approached the front desk, smiling. Mr. Sanders, he said smoothly, deferential, almost fawning, welcome back. Your suite is ready with the city view, and I've arranged your breakfast at the rooftop lounge. Your usual preference. Thank you, the man said, genuinely pleased. The manager bowed slightly, gesturing to the bellhop, his tone polite, respectful, even warm. Every movement, every word carefully crafted. Then a small group of black guests approached, confirmation in hand. Can I help you? He asked, clipped, impatient, eyes scanning them with subtle contempt. Michael Johnson. Reservation for today, one said politely. The manager pursed his lips, rolling his eyes barely enough to notice. I don't see that here. Are you sure you booked correctly? Yes, online, 2 weeks ago, another voice added. Well. I suppose we'll try to see if we can accommodate you, he said, voice dripping with insincerity. He waved a bellhop over. Check it. Quickly. The contrast was clear. White guests treated with warmth, speed, deference. Black guests delayed, scrutinized, subtly humiliated. Every word, every glance, every sigh screamed bias. She catalogued it all, silent but not invisible. And then he saw her. Excuse me, he snapped, voice rising. You. Stop. She didn't move. She tilted her head, calm, confident. You can't just walk in here, he said, voice harsh now, edged with arrogance. She smiled faintly. I beg your pardon. This is private space. I run this hotel. I decide who is welcome here, he said, voice growing sharp and cruel. Her eyes flicked toward the Johnsons. Really? And how long have you been running it like that? He stepped closer, arrogance radiating from him. I said, you. And then, the slap. Guests gasped, phones appeared, cameras recorded. The lobby, marble floors, velvet chairs, carefully curated luxury, shattered under the force of the moment. He believed he had power. She would apologize. She would bow. But she didn't. "I own this hotel," she said finally, calm, deliberate. Every word carried authority. The manager's smirk vanished. Confusion flashed, quickly replaced by panic. You can't be serious," he stammered. "I am," she said softly, moving toward him with deliberate grace. "I trusted your leadership, but I see now that trust was misplaced." Her gaze swept the room, locking on each staff member complicit in his behavior. "You are no longer in my employ. And neither is anyone who enabled this behavior." Security stepped forward. The manager paled, realizing the full scope of his mistake. The lobby held its breath. Guests murmured, some recording, some simply stunned. The Johnsons approached hesitantly. "Thank you, Michael's voice faltered. She nodded faintly. "It ends today. No one should be treated like that." The silence hit first. Not the calm kind. The dangerous kind. The kind that crawled across the lobby after the sound of skin against skin faded, after the echo of shock had nowhere left to go. People stood frozen, guests halfway through lifting phones, staff mid-step, security uncertain whether to move or wait for instruction that would never come. The manager swallowed. "Ma'am, he began. She didn't answer. She turned slightly, just enough to address the head of security standing near the marble column. "Escort him out," she said quietly. "Now." The words landed heavier than a shout. Security hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Long enough for the manager to notice. "You can't," he started, turning toward them. "You know who I am. I run this." "Formerly," she corrected, her voice calm but unmistakable. The head of security shifted. Took a step forward. The manager laughed once, sharp and brittle. "This is ridiculous. You're all witnesses. This woman assaulted me first. She barged in here making demands. No one backed him. Not the receptionist whose hands were trembling behind the desk. Not the bellman staring at the floor. Not the guests pretending to check emails while recording everything." Security placed a hand on the manager's arm. "Sir, please come with us." "Get your hands off me," he snapped, yanking away. "Do you know how much money I make this hotel?" The CEO finally looked directly at him. "You don't," she said. "You cost it." That was when his face changed. Not anger. Fear. The walk. They didn't drag him. They didn't need to. The humiliation did the work. As he was escorted across the lobby, his polished shoes echoed too loudly against the marble floor. Every step felt observed. Judged. Guests parted instinctively, like water around debris. Someone whispered, "That's the manager." Another replied, "Not anymore." The revolving doors opened. Cold air rushed in. And just like that, he was gone. Inside the lobby. The lobby didn't return to normal. It couldn't. Staff stood clustered near the desk, voices low, eyes darting. The receptionist wiped her palms on her blazer, glancing toward the elevators like she expected someone else to be taken next. A white couple approached the desk hesitantly. The man cleared his throat. "So, can we still check in?" The receptionist looked up. For the first time in months, she didn't glance toward the manager's office for approval. "Yes," she said. "Of course." Her voice shook, but she smiled. The manager's office, 30 minutes earlier. The assistant manager sat stiffly in the leather chair, staring at his laptop screen. An email glowed there. Subject, guest complaint, discrimination allegation. Status, closed, resolved. He scrolled. Same template. Same phrasing. Same outcome. He told himself it was procedure. He always did. When the CEO's assistant appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, his heart skipped. "You're needed in conference room A," she said. No tone. No explanation. "Is this about the incident downstairs?" he asked carefully. She didn't answer. That was answer enough. Conference room A. The room was glass-walled. Transparent. No hiding. The CEO sat at the head of the table. A tablet lay in front of her. Beside it, a thick folder, printed pages. Receipts. Around the table sat the assistant manager, the front desk supervisor, the head of security, HR, legal counsel. No one spoke. She didn't rush them. Silence made people uncomfortable. It always had. Before we begin, she said, I want to be clear about something. She tapped the folder. These complaints did not start today. She looked at the assistant manager. Tell me why this one was marked resolved. She slid a document across the table. He glanced at it. His jaw tightened. That guest was accommodated, he said carefully. We offered an alternative room. After initially denying them access, she replied. Why? They arrived late. Availability was tight. She didn't respond. Instead, she swiped her tablet. Another document appeared on the screen behind her. Dates. Names. Patterns. All black guests, she said calmly. Late arrivals. Overbooked. Redirected. All within policy, correct? The front desk supervisor shifted. It's not about race, she said quickly. We just follow protocol. Show me the protocol, the CEO said. Silence. Because, she continued, I have footage of white guests arriving later that same night. Given complimentary upgrades. She looked directly at the supervisor. Explain that. The supervisor opened her mouth. Closed it. Security. The head of security cleared his throat. We enforce rules uniformly, he said. Anyone who causes disruption. You escorted a black guest out for asking why they were charged a deposit, the CEO interrupted. Yet 2 hours later, you allowed a white guest to shout at staff in this same lobby. She paused. Why? He stared at the table. That guest was influential. The word hung there. She nodded once. That will be all. Security stiffened. Ma'am. Turn in your access badge. HR will contact you. His shoulders sagged. He didn't argue. The assistant manager breaks. This is unfair, the assistant manager finally said, voice tight. You trusted us. You told us to protect the brand. I did, she said. And you protected your comfort instead. She flipped another page. Who instructed staff to flag certain surnames? The front desk supervisor looked up sharply. No one told us to. She held up a printed email. The supervisor's name sat neatly beneath the message. Be mindful of potential payment risks. What does that mean? The CEO asked. The supervisor swallowed. It means, we were told to be cautious. About who? The supervisor didn't answer. The CEO leaned back slightly. That's what I thought. She closed the folder. You're suspended effective immediately, she said. Pending investigation. The assistant manager stood abruptly. You can't just fire people like this. She met his eyes. I can, she said. And I am. Outside, the world reacts. Phones buzzed. Videos spread. A grainy clip of the slap. A caption, hotel manager assaults black woman, then gets fired. Speculation ignited. Some defended him. Others didn't. The CEO ignored it all. Night falls. The hotel glowed softly in the evening. Different now. Exposed. The CEO stood alone in the lobby, watching staff move with uncertainty, then purpose. She knew this wasn't over. This wasn't one manager. This was a system. And systems don't collapse quietly. She turned toward the elevators. We're just getting started, she said to no one. As she exited, the room still vibrated with the shock of what had happened. The polished lobby, the chandeliers, the scent of jasmine, it all remained, yet beneath it lay a tremor of truth. The hotel itself had shifted. The slap had been a culmination of months of bias and arrogance. The CEO had observed him carefully, noticing every instance of favoritism, every condescending word, every slight directed at guests of color. Each moment added weight to this one, the moment of reckoning. Today had been a test: patience, trust, authority. And she had passed, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with clarity. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The hotel itself would need more than reform, it would need a cultural overhaul. By the time the manager realized the story had slipped beyond his control, it had already grown teeth. He woke that morning convinced the worst was behind him. The night before had been loud: calls from regional directors, clipped messages from legal advising restraint, a dozen unread emails stacked like warnings, but none of it felt final. He had lived too long inside institutions that bent before men like him. He believed this would bend too. At 6:43 a.m., his statement went live. It was short, measured, polished. The kind of statement written by someone who understood plausible denial better than accountability. He described the incident as a misunderstanding. He said he had felt threatened. He said the situation had escalated unexpectedly. He did not deny the slap. He reframed it. "I acted under extreme stress," the statement read. The circulating footage does not reflect the full context of the encounter. For nearly 20 minutes, the strategy worked. Comment sections hesitated. Some asked what had led up to the moment. A few accounts repeated his words exactly, stressing that videos could be misleading, that people were rushing to judgment. He watched the numbers climb and felt the familiar steadiness return to his chest. This was the part he knew. Confusion always came first, and confusion was survivable. At 7:19 a.m., he agreed to a brief phone interview with a local radio station. He sounded calm. Professional. Slightly wounded. "I regret how things unfolded," he said. "But I was confronted aggressively. Anyone in my position might have reacted similarly." The host paused, then asked, aggressively, how? There was a fraction of a second too much silence. "Well," he said, "there were demands being made. Accusations. A refusal to leave the desk area." The clip circulated within minutes. And then the second video surfaced. This one did not begin late. It did not soften edges. It started with him already irritated, already leaning forward, already occupying space the way people like him always had. "Who do you think you are?" His voice rang clearly. "I know you're kind. You come in here dressed like that, acting like you belong. This isn't a charity lobby." She did not raise her voice. She did not move closer. She stood still. "You people always think money is optional," he continued. "Like the rules bend for you. They don't." There was no threat in her posture. No aggression. Just presence. The slap followed, sudden, sharp, unmistakable. Within minutes, the interview clip was replayed beside the video. His words collapsed under their own weight. The context he had promised arrived fully formed, and it contradicted him completely. By mid-morning, the narrative shifted from outrage to recognition. Former guests began posting not accusations, but confirmations. A black couple described being told their reservation had been misplaced while watching a white family check in seamlessly beside them. A consultant wrote about being asked for multiple forms of payment verification while his white colleague checked in with a smile and a single card. A woman posted screenshots of an email exchange in which she had been warned about appropriate clientele expectations after requesting an upgrade she had already paid for. None of the stories were dramatic. That was the problem. They fit together too cleanly. Inside the hotel, the atmosphere curdled. A junior clerk remembered the way the manager had leaned toward her once and said, "Smile less when they approach. It invites trouble." She remembered the white guest who complained about noise and was offered complimentary wine, and the black family who raised the same issue and were told the hotel was fully booked. A bellhop recalled being instructed to prioritize certain guests, without being told explicitly what that meant. He learned quickly. Everyone did. By noon, internal documents began leaking. Not through heroics. Through fatigue. A scheduling email surfaced showing black staff consistently assigned to back-of-house roles while less experienced white employees rotated through guest-facing positions. A memo followed, instructing staff to flag high-risk guests based on appearance, tone, and demeanor, language vague enough to be weaponized. Notes in the reservation system appeared next, coded, abbreviated, marking certain guests for extra verification without justification. Each document landed like weight added to a structure already cracking. At 12:47 p.m., the manager sent an internal email of his own. "I am deeply disappointed by how quickly this has escalated," it read. "I expect professionalism and discretion from all staff during this challenging time." Screenshots of that email appeared online before the hour ended. The board convened an emergency session that afternoon. The CEO joined without ceremony. She listened more than she spoke. She did not defend herself. She didn't need to. The evidence was doing that work. When a director asked how such behavior had gone unchecked, she answered plainly. "Because I trusted the leadership structure I put in place," she said. "And I failed to verify." That admission shifted the room. Responsibility landed where it belonged. The manager tried calling her just after the meeting ended. It rang twice before going to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He told himself she was busy. He tried again an hour later. Then again. By evening, his confidence began to erode. "This has gone too far," he typed in a message he erased before sending. He tried again. "I'm willing to apologize publicly. We can resolve this." Resolve meant quiet. A statement. A leave of absence. A return once the noise faded. He had seen it happen before. But the noise did not fade. It multiplied. Advocacy groups announced formal complaints. Regulators requested documentation. The hotel's largest corporate client suspended bookings pending investigation. Each development carried the situation further away from him, like an object drifting downstream beyond reach. That was when the begging began. It did not arrive dramatically. Desperation rarely does. He sent a longer message late that night, stripped of defensiveness, careful to sound reasonable. He called it a mistake. He blamed pressure. He mentioned his years of service. He asked for a conversation. There was no reply. The next morning, the messages multiplied, but they no longer came from him. An unfamiliar number texted first. A former colleague. "He's not a bad man," it read. "This doesn't have to end his career." Another followed minutes later. "Please consider the families affected. This situation is bigger than one moment." A third invoked faith. Forgiveness. Grace. None of them asked if she was okay. None acknowledged what had happened to her. Each framed the problem as inconvenience rather than harm. She forwarded them all to legal. By midday, the pressure escalated. A distant cousin emailed using a subject line that suggested urgency. A friend from a professional association left a voicemail asking for discretion. A pastor requested a private meeting to find a peaceful resolution. A junior investor hinted that prolonged publicity could affect future partnerships. Each attempt carried the same assumption, that the matter was still hers to close. It wasn't. The board issued its decision that afternoon. The manager was terminated effective immediately. An independent firm was appointed to investigate systemic discrimination across the hotel. Staff were invited to submit reports anonymously. Law enforcement was notified regarding the assault. When the announcement went public, the calls slowed. Inside the hotel, consequences rippled outward. The front desk supervisor, who had enforced discriminatory practices, resigned before questioning could begin. A senior administrator was placed on leave pending review. Training sessions were scheduled, then restructured, then replaced with something deeper. Policies were rewritten. Systems audited. Power redistributed. Guests noticed the difference not in statements, but in tone. Questions were answered without suspicion. Complaints handled without hierarchy. Staff stood straighter, spoke freer. The manager tried one last time that night, dialing a number he had sworn he wouldn't use. It rang once. Twice. Then disconnected. There would be no conversation. No private resolution. No final appeal. The story no longer belonged to him. It barely belonged to her. It had become larger than both, a reckoning long delayed. A week later, the CEO returned to the lobby unannounced. She stood where she had been struck, watching people pass through without recognition. That was the point. The space felt different. Not healed. But honest. And somewhere far from that lobby, a man who once believed he controlled it stared at his phone, waiting for a response that would never come. The morning started quietly, almost deceptively so. The city's pulse carried on outside the glass walls of the hotel lobby, oblivious to the storm that had rocked its floors just days before. Inside, the hotel was alive with movement, but every step, every glance, carried the weight of change. It was a different kind of tension, not explosive like the slap that had gone viral, not immediately sensational, but a deep, simmering awareness that the balance of power had shifted. And everyone in the building could feel it. The manager, once untouchable, sat in his home office staring at a stack of unopened envelopes and official letters. Legal notices. Summons. Investigations. His phone, once a tool of power and influence, now felt like a cage. Calls he had hoped would convince her to be lenient went unanswered. Messages from friends and family begging for mercy piled up, their tones ranging from desperation to veiled threats, but none mattered. Every attempt to manipulate or delay the consequences had failed. The law had taken a definitive step toward holding him accountable, and he knew it. For the first time, he was truly powerless. Meanwhile, in the hotel, the CEO moved with quiet authority. She didn't make announcements. She didn't call press conferences. She walked through the corridors and into the lobby, observing the shifts, the staff interactions, the tone of the place. Her presence alone was a reminder of accountability, but more than that, it was the start of something new. From the outside, it might have looked calm, but internally, she was orchestrating a transformation that would ripple through every corner of the hotel, touching every employee, every policy, every guest interaction. The day began with the arrival of the external auditing team. They were methodical, precise, moving through the hotel like surgeons examining a patient. They interviewed staff quietly, reviewed schedules and emails, cross-referenced complaints, and watched footage. Every small action, every previously overlooked detail, now had weight. Staff who had endured the manager's biases felt a cautious relief. Some whispered to each other, smiles barely perceptible, recognizing that the reckoning was finally coming. Tension built slowly as the results of these investigations began to surface. Not to the public yet, but internally. Patterns of discrimination, long buried under procedural language and excuses, were now undeniable. Staff who had once been dismissed for minor infractions or subtle misbehavior, were now recognized as victims of systemic prejudice. Leadership who had condoned or ignored these patterns faced suspension or reassignment. The manager's arrogance, which had once seemed untouchable, now loomed over him like a shadow, highlighting the futility of his previous power plays. Outside, news of the ongoing legal and corporate scrutiny spread in measured waves. Unlike the initial viral frenzy, this was a slow burn. Reporters called, but the hotel released minimal statements, each one factual and restrained. The city began to recognize that the story wasn't just about a slap, it was about accountability, about transformation, about a leader who refused to let injustice persist under her roof. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the CEO's reputation began to rise, a quiet counterweight to the manager's collapse. Inside the hotel, the workforce revamp began. It wasn't a show. It wasn't a dramatic purge meant to signal power. It was precise, calculated, and deeply necessary. Hiring policies were rewritten to ensure fairness and diversity. Recruitment now prioritized competency and integrity over bias or favoritism. Staff who had been overlooked for promotions or opportunities because of subtle prejudices were recognized, advanced, and empowered. Leadership positions were reassigned or replaced where necessary, but always with an eye toward building a culture of accountability rather than fear. Training sessions followed. Not lectures or long-winded mandates, but practical, scenario-based sessions that addressed professional standards, ethical guest treatment, and systemic biases that had gone unchecked. Staff began to understand not just the what of the new policies, but the why. The hotel was no longer just a place of business, it was a microcosm of fairness, a system designed to prevent the kind of abuses that had gone viral just weeks earlier. Meanwhile, the hotel itself began to recover. There was a short-term dip in bookings, inevitable after the scandal, but this was temporary. Word spread quickly about the comprehensive changes, a professional, inclusive, accountable environment where guests of all backgrounds were treated equally and fairly. Repeat customers returned, bringing new guests with them, drawn by stories of both justice and transformation. The hotel began to regain its reputation and eventually surpass its previous status, not because of sensational headlines, but because of the tangible, measurable improvements in service, staff morale, and customer experience. Amid all this, the CEO's personal profile shifted dramatically. While many had known her as a quiet, effective business leader, the scandal and her decisive handling of it revealed layers previously hidden. Investigations by local media uncovered her other business holdings, her extensive conglomerates, and the sheer breadth of her influence. She became known as one of the wealthiest and most industrious women in the city, a revelation that stunned many who had underestimated her. The irony wasn't lost on the public or the former manager. The very person he had slapped, the person he thought he could dismiss, was a powerhouse far beyond his imagination. Through all of this, the manager's world continued to unravel. Criminal charges loomed, and his legal team struggled to negotiate any form of leniency. The letters and notices were precise and cold, no negotiation, no pleading could reverse the course. Even his friends, family, and former allies, who had tried to mediate or plead on his behalf, could do nothing. Every message forwarded to the CEO or her team was met with silence or acknowledgement that the matter was out of her control. The public exposure, combined with legal action and corporate accountability, ensured that his arrogance could not be salvaged. Tension within the hotel ebbed and flowed as these changes took root. Staff navigated new responsibilities, promotions, and a renewed sense of authority. Guests noticed subtle shifts in tone, confidence, and service. The lobby, once a place where fear or caution lingered among staff, became vibrant and professional, yet still grounded in respect and awareness. The CEO walked through this environment quietly, observing, occasionally offering guidance or acknowledgement, but largely allowing the system she rebuilt to demonstrate its own efficacy. Suspense remained because, although the manager's fate was set in motion, the public and staff still watched for ripple effects. Would other systems fail? Would hidden biases resurface? Each day brought minor tests, complaints, operational challenges, interactions with difficult clients, but the newly structured workforce and revamped policies handled them with competence and fairness. Every successful resolution reinforced the narrative, change was possible, and accountability had teeth. Amid this resurgence, the CEO herself maintained a quiet presence. She did not revel in the collapse of the manager nor in the growing fame she was accruing. Her focus remained squarely on the hotel, on staff, and on the integrity of the systems she had put in place. She took private moments to reflect on the lessons learned, acknowledging where trust had been misplaced, where oversight had failed, and where vigilance was essential moving forward. Her reckoning was private but deeply felt, a silent acknowledgement of responsibility that guided every decision she made. The manager, by contrast, had no such luxury. Attempts to regain influence or control failed at every turn. Friends and family called, texted, and emailed in vain. Corporate intermediaries, legal advisors, even former colleagues, tried to mitigate damage, but the tide had turned irreversibly. Criminal investigations advanced, civil liabilities were implied, and his professional reputation was effectively destroyed. The juxtaposition was stark: she was rising in influence, respect, and capability; he was falling, exposed, powerless, and irrelevant. As the weeks passed, the hotel's transformation became undeniable. Staff were empowered to act without fear, new leadership set examples, and guests experienced a service standard that had never existed before. Repeat bookings surged. Word-of-mouth recommendations highlighted both the quality of service and the integrity of management. Media coverage praised the CEO's handling of the crisis, emphasizing how she had not only held the guilty accountable but had also rebuilt and improved the very system the manager had tried to dominate. Finally, the CEO returned to the lobby, the scene of the infamous slap, for a quiet moment of closure. She stood where the incident had occurred, observing the flow of people, the efficiency of staff, and the calm professionalism of the environment. It was normal, but it was also transformed. Nothing was perfect, but the foundation was solid, ethical, and accountable. The space no longer bore the weight of arrogance, prejudice, or fear. It bore the promise of consistency, fairness, and progress. And then, naturally, came the moment for the audience, the viewers or readers, to be invited into what was next. Without breaking the story's realism or tone, the CEO's journey, the hotel's transformation, and the manager's fall could be a springboard. A voiceover, narration, or subtle call, those who wanted to witness more stories of accountability, justice, and transformation could subscribe, follow, or stay tuned, ensuring they didn't miss the next chapter in similar tales. The narrative came full circle: tension, fall, rise, and resolution, rewarding patience, showing consequences, and pointing forward. The city, the guests, the staff, and the CEO herself moved on. The manager's missteps, arrogance, and attempts at manipulation had left him isolated, facing the law and his own reflection. Meanwhile, the hotel thrived under renewed systems, empowered staff, and an environment that was safe, fair, and welcoming for all. The CEO's profile rose, not as a byproduct of scandal, but as a result of decisive action, integrity, and visible competence. Her conglomerates, previously known to few, became the subject of public interest, revealing the depth of her influence and the industriousness that had quietly driven her success for years. The contrast could not have been sharper. Where arrogance and ignorance had once dominated a lobby, accountability, fairness, and professionalism now ruled. Where power had been abused, systems now protected staff and guests alike. Where fear and inaction had permitted injustice, vigilance and decisive action now guaranteed change. The story, rich with consequences and transformation, was complete, but its echoes lingered, proof that leadership mattered, that justice could be served, and that integrity had lasting power.